If you have Visio 2010 Professional or Premium Edition, then you have the link data feature available to you for getting data into shapes. Now you can link to various data sources, OLE, DB, ODBC, Access, Excel, SharePoint, and SQL Server, but I think for demonstration purposes, Excel is pretty simple and probably the easiest way to go. So what we have here is some light bulb data for our light bulb shape example that we've been doing throughout this chapter. And what's important here is we've got a model column that's probably really just manufacturers. In this case, we've got a bulb type, compact fluorescent halogen, incandescent LEDs and whatnot, and we have power ratings for each bulb. Now over here I've built a unique ID for each one that just is a little bit easier than reading maybe just a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's built up of the other fields. So it just takes the first two characters of this column, and this column and puts it all together with a dash between them. So that's the data source. Let's go over to Visio, and you can see we've got one light bulb master stored in the document stencil. If we drag it out, you can see it has power, watts, model, bulb type, surveyed we're not going to use. But what's nice to note about this is that the names or labels of the shape data fields actually match the Excel fields here. And that makes things go a lot easier when it comes to data mapping. So let's go back to Visio. And we need to import the data source. So how do you do that? First thing you do is go to the Data tab and click the Link Data to Shapes button. So you can see, again, here are all the various data sources you can link to. We'll stay with Excel for now. Click Next. I've got the path stored right here in the frequently or most recently used list. So we'll just take that. Now it's got a named range in it, but we don't even have to take that for link data. We can just take sheet 1 and Visio will figure out where the data is. And since we've only got one block of data in that Excel sheet, things will be just fine. The first row does contain headings, so that'll help with all the mapping. And we can choose individual columns and rows. You can have a look. It shows us some sample values, but yes, we do want ID, model, bulb type, and power. So we'll just leave that the way it is. Select all the columns, all the rows, go on. And yes, we want the ID field to be the one that uniquely identifies each record in the data. So we'll keep that selected. Hit next and we're done. And up comes the external data window, which is essentially a representation of that Excel data. You can see it right there. So there are several ways to get this data into these shapes, and the simplest one is just to drop a shape on the page and drag a record right onto it. You can see there's some special highlighting around the shape as I drag that data bit there, and Visio even creates a data graphic for us right away. So you can, if we select the shape, you can see that there's the ID, and we've got the power right there. Now you'll notice that Visio actually added the ID field for us, and that's what data linking does when it doesn't find a label that matches one of the column headers in the data source. So you can see the basic shape doesn't have an ID field, but the linked data, the linked shape does have an ID field, so that's pretty cool. Another thing you can do is if you have a master in a stencil selected and you drag any data record onto the page, it'll just drag the shape for you. So there's two different ways you can drag data onto a shape. So we could change this shape to the second record, and it just warns me that it's going to change it. Or we can actually just have something selected like we did there. And that actually works for multiple shapes. So I'm just going to hold down, let's see, Control key and select multiple records. Make sure I've got a master selected over here, and watch what happens when I do this. They're all linked up to each one. And again, you can see the link, the chain link feature that shows us that this record is linked. Now this is important if you're trying to make sure you've placed every item in your data set. You can just keep looking until you find a chain link. Now if you're wondering which shape has that data, you can right click and say, where did it go? Linked shapes. And there's light bulb page 1. Click on that and Visio highlights it for us. So I thought it was up here, but it's actually down here. If I have multiple copies of this shape, let's right click again. Linked shapes now has 3 items in it, so we can go to each one. Okay. Now if I want to delete the link in the shape, I can right click on the shape and say data remove. Okay, I got to go up a little bit higher so you can see it. So remember, all 3 of these are linked to the same data record. If I right click on this and go to the data menu, I can say unlink from row, and it's no longer linked to the data. So let's double check that. If we right click here, link shapes only has 2 items right now. Now, easier way to unlink all of them is to right click on the item itself and say, let's see, unlink, and all 3 of them will lose their data association. So it doesn't have that item anymore. Unlink from row. No unlink from row. And this one, no unlink from row. So they've all been, their linking has been removed. Let's just delete all the shapes and start over here for a second. Another scenario you might have is where, as you added shapes, you actually created some sort of ID that's likely to be matched in the data set. So let's go here and let's see here. Let's just add an ID field to these 2 shapes. Define shape data. New field, we'll call it ID. That should be enough. And we'll just type some of these IDs down here. So the first one's FL-CF-10, but we don't have any of the attributes for that particular model or that ID. Let's do the second one, GECF13. Now, neither one of these shapes is linked to the data, but they do have IDs that match some of the records in the data set. So what happens if we go to automatically link? And up comes a dialog. All shapes on this page. Next. We want to automatically link if the ID equals the ID. So Visio allows you to specify some sort of mapping. And we could say link to the, we could have done by power or model, but you can see by the data they're not necessarily unique. Only the ID is unique, so only the ID makes sense for automatically linking. So we can go through here, finish, and sure enough, this is now linked to the first record, and this shape is now linked to the second record. So that opens up all sorts of interesting scenarios. You can either make sure you've dropped every record in a data set to a shape by looking for the links, or if you have a bunch of shapes on the page that have something like an ID already set, some sort of maybe some sort of configuration, sales configuration system you developed on top of Visio where people know what the ID is but they don't want to spend time entering all the data. Well, now once you've got the ID set, you can get that data pushed into the shapes easily. And again, another type of scenario you might have is that you need actual parts that exist. So again, we've talked about creating a floor plan where we're surveying, let's say, surveying our office, and the kitchen has 3 light bulbs, and the bedroom has 2 light bulbs. But we don't want them just to be light bulbs. We want them to be specific types of light bulbs. So we can say now the kitchen has only compact fluorescents, and the bedroom has incandescents because they burn a little bit more warmly, and there's actually a high-powered one in the main light. So now we've got our home layout. Our light bulb survey has been created, but we have each light bulb linked to actual pieces of equipment or actual light bulbs that we can buy, or actual light bulbs that we have in stock. So the drawing is starting to match the real world much more closely, and now we can create reports and things like that. So that's how you do data linking in Visio 2010 if you have professional or premium. It's not too hard, and there are a lot of little subtleties to it that make it pretty flexible and pretty powerful. So enjoy using data linking.